35 years ago, I published my first story. It was in the Sunday magazine of the Hartford Courant, circulation over 300,000. It was a first-person Walter Mitty piece. The table of contents reads, "One moment he was just a regular guy lounging in front of the tube, wearing pajamas and waiting for the opening face-off. The next, he was elbow to elbow with unruly professional puck pushers." Here goes. A View from the Penalty Box by Robert A. Muldoon. My good fortune came suddenly on October 22nd, 1983. It thrust me, a 9-to-5 office worker, into the limelight of Major League professional sports. It happened at 6 o'clock on an otherwise uneventful Saturday night. Unshaven and pajama clad, I'd spent my afternoon watching sports on television. My evening would be no different, or so I thought. The Hartford Whalers were skating against the Buffals Sabres in a televised NHL game at 7:30. With keen anticipation, I awaited the opening face-off. Then the phone rang. It was my roommate Brad Peters, a press attendant for the Hartford Whalers, yelling on the other end of the line, "Get down here quickly! We need someone to work in the penalty box. One of the regulars can't make it. I volunteered you to take his place." I jumped for joy, fell to my knees, and performed a touchdown dance that would have made Billy White Shoes Johnson envious. In the midst of this boisterous merrymaking, the sudden awareness of my slovenly state caused me to panic. I had but an hour and a half to shower, shave, dress, and drive to the Hartford Civic Center Coliseum. Challenging land speed records, I arrived at the Civic Center press gate and was ushered inside in the manner of an important foreign dignitary. My supervisor, a Mr. Henderson, thanked me effusively for showing up on such short notice and briskly escorted me to a room deep within the bowels of the Coliseum. A pre-game buffet was being served to members of the press. The room resembled a shark aquarium at supper time. Hockey writers in a feeding frenzy swarmed ravenously around the banquet table, engorging themselves. Mr. Henderson invited me to join the fray. He then introduced me to the other penalty box worker, a crusty veteran, and told us to go to work. With a well-practiced and stately stride, the old-timer marched onto the slick, resurfaced ice. Taking baby steps to avoid an embarrassing fall, I followed. He entered the Buffalo penalty box and motioned for me to take the adjacent Hartford box. I sat down and eagerly awaited instructions from either my counterpart, the statisticians, or the PA announcer Greg Golden Lungs Gilmartin. No one said anything. Finally, as players on both teams circled the ice, I timidly asked the official scorer to outline my duties. When there's a penalty on a player, open the gate and let him in, and when it's over, let him out," he said tersely. It sounded easy. Nonetheless, I prayed that the first penalty of the evening would be on Buffalo. Moreover, I prayed that there would be no bench-clearing brawls. With the Star-Spangled Banner blaring overhead, I nervously practiced opening and closing the penalty box gate. After all, with 12,000 people watching, a sticky door is not a trifling matter. The gate operated smoothly, without protest. A quick upward thrust opened it, a sharp downward tug clicked it shut. The full weight of my circumstances hit me moments before the opening face-off. Snatched from my cozy den, I'd been deposited in the middle of 12,000 frenzied fans. Visions of gross foul-ups danced in my head as the puck fell to start the game. My only comfort was that the best seat in the arena was mine. I could reach out and touch the players, and as they barreled down the ice, the blades of their sticks came perilously close to my head. At 6:31 of the opening period, referee Bruce Hood called the first penalty of the game. A few agonizing moments passed before Mark Renault of Buffalo skated to the other box to serve 2 minutes for interference. I heaved a great sigh of relief and intensely studied my counterpart in the Buffalo box. I noted how he kept one eye on the clock. And just as the 2 minutes expired, he masterfully opened the door and released his prey. It was a thing of beauty and precision. The second penalty of the game came at 18-18 on Buffalo's Bill Height for interference. Thinking that the Whalers would go unpenalized for the first period, I felt like a death row prisoner given a stay of execution. Then, just 5 seconds later, it happened. Mike Zook of Hartford received 2 minutes for interference. Every TV camera in the Coliseum swung over to the penalty box. With a nonchalance that disguised severe anxiety, I opened the door and let Zook into the sin bin. Mike, a crowd favorite of fans who delight in yelling, "Zook!" slumped down on the bench next to me. His face bore the zipper-like scars of his rugged trade and frightened me, but his eyes were gentle and set me at ease. Zook still had time on his penalty when the period ended, so it would be the beginning of the next before my door-opening medal would be tested. When the second period began, Zook stood poised and ready like a thoroughbred at the starting gate. I tensed, looking at the clock, awaiting my big moment. "Never mind," Zook said. "You don't have to open the gate. I'll jump over when the time expires." Gad Zook! A few seconds later, he jumped and roared onto the ice. I was still untested and still nervous and now depressed until a slashing penalty was called on Hartford's Norman DuPont. The pungent odor of DuPont's sweat fouled the penalty box air. His chest heaved mightily. He placed his head between his knees and spat streams of blood. Somehow the macho demonstration gave me courage. I told him that only 10 seconds remained on his penalty, and he perked up. I flawlessly opened the gate latch, and he shot onto the ice. Like a figure skater who has performed his first 2 triple toe loops perfectly, I felt ready to handle anything, even a full-scale fracas. 2 more Buffalo penalties were issued before Hartford's Eddie Boxcar Hospodar was banished to the box for elbowing at 14:15 of the middle period. The Boxcar, a strapping 215-pounder with an ornery disposition, is one of the hardest and most vicious checkers in the NHL. No stranger to fisticuffs, Hospodar, now playing for the Philadelphia Flyers, regularly tangles with the opposition's toughest. I treated Hospodar very deferentially. He was still enraged at perceived injustices and swore like a mule skinner. I feared that he might direct his merciless wrath my way and pummel me, but he simmered down and left me unharmed. Future Hall of Famer Gilbert Perreault of Buffalo transgressed, hooking at 17:57 of the second period. Toothless, the great Perreault showered abuse on the officials in a heavy French accent. Sacré bleu. Coming into the 83-84 season, he'd scored 421 goals, 16th on the all-time list. I gazed at him in awe. My idolatrous reverie was snapped when referee Hood whistled the final infraction of the period on Hartford's burly defenseman, Chris Kotsopoulos, for hooking. His penalty turned out to be the last of the game for Hartford. Only 2 penalties were called in the third period, and both were on Buffalo. Mike Ramsey for tripping and Perreault for holding. I enjoyed a fine final period of uninterrupted hockey action from the best seat in the arena. It certainly beat my reclining chair at home. So my Cinderella evening came to a happy close, except that Buffalo had won 5-2, and my check was a whopping $15. 2 weeks later, lightning struck again, but not exactly in the same part of the rink. After my experience in the penalty box, I started sticking by the phone, clean-shaven and dressed, whenever the Whalers played at home. I was rewarded handsomely when, a few games later, my roommate Brad called again. The Whalers were hosting the Los Angeles Kings and needed a replacement in the promotions department. Mr. Henderson greeted me like an old friend at the Civic Center press gate and led me down to the familiar buffet. He explained that the Whalers had a lucrative contract with a local car dealer, which called for one of the dealer's cars to be showcased between the first and second periods of all home games. As the car rolls around the ice, the PA announcer highlights its sleek features and recites bits of hockey trivia. My mission would be to drive the dealer's car. I nearly choked on my Swedish meatballs. I could vividly envision myself hitting the accelerator instead of the brake and skidding and slamming through the boards into the crowd. The banner headlines of the next morning's Hartford Courant would proclaim the gory details. 20 killed as driver goes berserk at Civic Center. 15,000 look on in horror. Mad dog Muldoon under heavy guard. One faulty move while circling the ice in the unfamiliar car would make me a public spectacle, a source of universal derision and contempt. The only other time in my life that I felt so much pressure to perform occurred when I served as an altar boy at midnight mass on Christmas Eve. With 5 minutes left in the first period, Mr. Henderson handed me the keys to a shiny new Honda Accord. Just before the siren sounded to end the first period, the Zamboni operator pulled up behind me and yelled, "When you finish your lap, let me go onto the ice before you get off." The thought of ramming into the Zamboni had not occurred to me earlier. It did now. Posture rigid, stiffened arms clutching the wheel, eyes glued straight ahead, veins standing out on neck, I must have looked to those peering in through the glass like a bottled laboratory specimen in formaldehyde. Feeling the collective gaze of 15,000 people, my face involuntarily reddened. The longest 100 yards of my life lay in front of me. The car eased slowly onto the ice, neither lunging nor racing. The ice offered good traction after the period of heavy skating. My concentration did not waver. My mind remained riveted to the task. At the halfway point of the circuit, I dared to relax. Scanning the crowd, my eyes were drawn almost magically to a stunning blonde, smiling and waving at me. This attention so strengthened my confidence that my fears vanished. I suddenly felt in control and didn't even think about colliding with the Zamboni when I left the ice. Success. And the Whalers beat the Kings 2-1. The Whalers had many games left, and I was optimistic about my chances for future substitutions. Unfortunately, I spent the rest of the season waiting by the phone for a call that never came. It is said, however, that good things come to those who wait. Just before this 1984-85 season, I received a phone call from my old pal, Mr. Henderson. He said the Whalers needed someone to do the between-period promotions, driving the car around the ice, the shoot-to-win contest for a trip to Hawaii, and the $100,000 shot contest. Needless to say, I accepted. You can now see me between periods of all home games performing these tasks. I am the nervous one. A footnote. I went on to drive the car on ice for 10 NHL seasons. As the team's fortunes rose, the car went from Hondas to Buicks to Cadillacs. In the end, I was accompanied on ice by Miss Cadillac. What a ride! 400 NHL games, an all-star game in Hartford. And in 2011, I wrote a novel, Brass Bonanza Plays Again, how hockey's strangest goon brought back Mark Twain and a dead team, made a city believe. And that tied a bow on my experience with the late